Hello, and welcome to Music Maps, the Rock and Roll Book Club podcast. In each episode, we use a place as a jumping off point for a conversation about music, anywhere from the obvious to the obscure.
Now, we need to bring our A game today. You know how normally we just speak to journalists and, I don't know, musicians? Well, today we've got proper novelist, yeah? So, proper novelist, and furthermore, a doctor to boot, academic. So, I hope your questions are up to it, Simon. Tiffany, normally I kind of introduce Simon as my Passepartout to my Phineas Fogg, or my Magellan to, I don't know, someone else. But I'm not doing that today because we got proper cartographers possibly listening. Now, our guest today is Tiffany Murray. Tiffany is, as I've said, a novelist. Her books include Happy Accidents, which drew comparisons with Stella Gibbons and her classic Cold Comfort Farm. And in a review for the wonderfully titled 2010 novel, Diamond Star Halo, nice work, Tiffany was described as the glam rock Dodie Smith. Simon, you must know who Dodie Smith is.
I do.
Yeah.
Don't know anything about it, though.
101 Dalmatians. I Captured the Castle. I mean, pretty good comparisons. Anyway, that aside, today Tiffany is here to talk to us about a fabulous memoir, My Family and Other Rock Stars. Tiffany,
Here we go.
Welcome to Music Maps.
Thank you so much, Mark. That's lovely. Thank you, Simon. And yes, there is a map right in the opening of this.
That's the reason. So this is our first ever visit. It's the first time we've placed a pin in our music map in Monmouthshire, which is on the Welsh-English borders and is the home of the famed Rockfield Studio. Now, the title, of course, is a nod to the Gerald Durrell classic, My Family and Other Animals, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, did you know, Tiffany? This shows the level of research we do. You share a literary agent with Gerald Durrell.
No,
Curtis
I
Brown.
didn't.
Yes.
Oh, I love the research you've done. I didn't know that. Oh my God.
Well, the research was simply so I could say that your cast of characters is no less exotic than those in Durrell's famous book set on the Greek island of Corfu.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And Tiffany, you'll like this. The guy who helps us on production, Andy, is an engineer at Abbey Road. And he's a whiz at all this. And we just send him the files. So Simon sends him the files. And in about 20 minutes, he makes sure all the levels are right.
And he did set a record last week of 34 minutes to turn around a whole episode, which I don't think he will ever be able to beat. So That's the current new record. Yeah, so there we go. Right, so let's start right at the beginning. So what can you tell us about the early years of Rockfield prior to your arrival?
That before we got there in the winter of 74, it was basically Charles and Kingsley Ward, who had the farm, which is called Amberley Court. They loved Elvis Presley, and they formed a group just with themselves called the Charles and Kingsley Combo. Went up to London to seek their fortune. I think George Martin was involved, Kingsley rushing in there and saying, listen to us. And when that didn't work out, they came home and being, pretty practical Welsh farmers, looked at all the outbuildings and first of all the attic, and they put pig feed bags in the attic walls for sound insulation, and they recorded themselves. And gradually that, Mott the Hoople then came and recorded, and gradually they started sort of...
Was that the first band, Mott the Hoople?
There'll
be... band to come? Possibly.
Yeah, there'll be Rockfield aficionados out there who would have a better, So I am a writer, not a researcher, but it was Elephant's Memory, Dave Edmunds, and Mott the Hoople, because they Hereford, not far away, and they would the Studio 2 was the first studio that was down by the house that's still going, that they converted the stable into the studio. And that's where Oasis did, the Wonderwall is there apparently, and that's where they did the album, definitely, maybe. And then gradually over the years, up in the main quadrangle, then in 75, that's where they built the quadrangle studio, which is, in my parlance, is Studio 1, which is where all the sort of record company money bands would come. So that's how they started. But they used to be called, right at the beginning, they were called Future Sounds. And Dave Edmunds came in. There's a wonderful video on YouTube where he's just doing all the instruments and he's engineering and producing and doing this and doing that. And apparently it was Dave who said, why are you calling it Future Sounds? Why don't you call it Rockfield? Because the local village is called Rockfield. So Charles and Kingsley were like, oh, all right then. So that was that.
So it's the first residential studio in the world, I think.
Yeah, ultimately. It's the first residential studio in the world. So, it's the first studio to capture those bands. And the bands back then, and what I talk about in My Family and Other Rock Stars, for a kid with, a single mum, is they were all men and they were all boys, really.
Yeah.
So it became not like a boarding school or anything like that, but more like suddenly these bands were captured. They couldn't go anywhere. Yes, so they could walk into Monmouth, but, that's it. There's nothing, everything is laid on for them there. So they had to sink or swim, really. They had to really work and produce, which is what bands like Rush did. They just worked the whole time. I can't remember how long the Stone Roses were there for, something like 18 months or something.
A long
crazy.
time.
A long time.
A long
back in the
time.
days of record company money. So it was, and I do remember, if American or I remember this Dutch band called Solution being there, and the American bands would just walk around and look at things and standing the fields in a kind of like a, what the hell, man, what's going on? And, it was just that wonderful disconnect, but they really had to work.
But you land there with your mum, Joan, and actually, outside of Rockfield, there's a place called the Vicarage, and that's where you and your mum end up there. Tell us a little bit about the Vicarage and what your mum was doing.
Well, that's where we started off. The Vicarage was basically her boyfriend's house, and there was a big house and no money. So instead of going out and getting a job in 1972 or whenever it was, Mum put an advert in the Times saying rehearsal space for bands, no heavy rock, because the boyfriend would play Land of Hope and Glory and things like that. And the first band to appear were Black Sabbath, so that didn't quite work out. so
not in the heavy rock genre whatsoever.
No, not at all. More folky. So we shared the house with them, and that was interesting. In the book, there's a whole chapter about that. And then we had Queen, and they were rehearsing Sheer Heart Attack, and then going on to Rockfield. Then we had this wonderful band called Tracks, who nobody has heard of, but look up their video on YouTube for their one song. What's it called? Wasn't It Nice? They're brilliant. A funk band with bright orange hair.
So you're about 6 years old or something at this point. What do you make of Black Sabbath?
What's the line from Aeroplane? A hat, a brooch, a pterodactyl. It was very loud. I remember that because Queen were in previous, Queen were in afterwards. So, not so loud. And Horselips were very loud, actually, as loud as Black Sabbath, I'd say. But one particular night, because it's Vicarage, so the graveyard is next door, and these screams and cries woke me up. And I looked through the curtain, there was a full moon, and Ozzy is dancing around the graveyard, with no clothes on. But it just seemed, even though I was slightly freaked out as a child, because I I love Rumpelstiltskin, and I was obsessed. I was thinking, oh God, it's Rumpelstiltskin, but it wasn't. It was Ozzy, and it was all dealt with very calmly. And Mum just got him in, and all the because don't forget these bands when they rehearse that they will have engineers with them to sort out the guitars and stuff like that. And roadies coming to move things around for them, so they all got him in, and it was all fine. Quite low key, really, I suppose, for Ozzy in 70, whenever it was, early 70s. So yeah, but then of course Black Sabbath appeared at Rockfield. They never, well, in my time they didn't record there. They recorded there later, but they were at the Old Mill for a lot of the time, which was Rockfield's rehearsal space. So Ozzy would always be shooting his 12-bore. Well, it wasn't 12-bore; it was rifles. Yeah. Oh no, a 12-bore because Kingsley had one of those old clay pigeon traps. So there's this wonderful photograph in the book with Ozzy with a shotgun. But yeah.
And they'd been there before making Paranoid, prior to.
They rehearsed. Yeah, exactly. That's where it was in Studio 2 that they did that. And you go into Studio 2 now, and you do. It's almost got the same carpet. It certainly has the same. The white. What's it called? It looks like butcher's. You could hang butcher's hooks from it. The sound insulation on the wall. But you just get your hairs go up on your arms, and you can just feel all these ghosts of songs. Paranoid being definitely one of them.
When did you last visit Rockfield, Tiffany?
Not long ago. I hadn't seen them since we left in '82, and I got in contact with Lisa Ward, who runs it now with Kingsley Ward, who runs it with Anne, his wife. And that was in 23 rather. And so I went there and did a final draft, which was great. And the Charlatans were there, and then the Manics came in. So it was all still buzzing, and it had the same, like doof-da-da, and all the dogs barking and the horses neighing. And it hadn't changed a bit. Honestly, it was wonderful. I even had my mother's old pots and pans, some of them, two of them.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And, ever since 23, I've been going over regularly and just, I suppose, rekindling old friendships, which is lovely.
You've mentioned a few buildings on the site. Can you paint a picture for our listeners and give us a description of the wider Rockfield site? Can you tell us what we'd encounter as we come down the lane, the vicarage, the Studio 1, etc., etc.?
Well, at Rockfield, there's two beautiful old posts. You walk up the track. I wouldn't call it a lane. It's a track. It's the same Rockfield track with the potholes, etc. And then you pass the lodge on the left, which is where, when I was a kid, one brother and his family, Charles Ward and his family, lived, and I loved his daughters. And they taught me about David Bowie and Dave Vanian and everything I ever needed to know about life. And then on the right-hand side, as you're walking up the track, is Studio 2, which is part of the main Amberley Courthouse, which is where Bampy Ward and Nana Ward lived, or Grandma Ward, and then Kingsley Ward and Anne Ward had their flat in there. So where the other part of the family lived. And then there was the engineer's shed in there, this wonderful engineer. Talking about engineers, there's many of the Rockfield engineers layered in this book. Otto Garms, he had his engineer shed in there. And as you go up the track further, on the right-hand side at the edge of a building, which is attached to the Studio 2, is the weather vane. The Black Horse iron weather vane, which supposedly is the weather vane that Freddie was looking at as he was composing bits of, Bohemian Rhapsody. And then you keep going up, you turn left, and then you're into the quadrangle. And it really is, it's an old horse stable quadrangle. So it goes almost all the way around. And when you enter it, straight ahead of you are the chalets, which are converted stables where all the bands live. And that's where I lived as a kid with the bands. So, you could have anybody from Freddie Mercury to Budgie. So all the bands were around us in the other chalets. They were just open plan, one up, one down. So if you're in the middle of the quadrangle, if you look to your left, you have all the echo chambers, which back then they weren't there, but they are now. Behind you, which is now the office, used to be the tack room. And apparently that is where Freddie had a piano, and I would listen to, as they were doing all the levels of the Galileos, that's where he would play at night. And then as you look right, you can tell I'm doing my left and my right. If you look right, that's where the studio, I know, that's where the actual control room, and then the live room. And then beyond that is the rehearsal room, where they also used to record. Because don't forget, all these bands would spill out, like Rush,
Yes.
with Farewell to Kings, at the beginning. Those were all the Rockfield birds, and they were walking in the quadrangle recording. And right nestled into that corner was is still there, my mother's kitchen. You'd walk up a few steps into a tiny dining room. It's bigger now. And on the left was her tiny, tiny kitchen, and it was all blue Formica, and just one 4-ringed, electric cooker. Poor woman. So, but don't forget the other Rockfield Kingdom, talking of maps, go back to the end of the track and up the opposite hill is Little Anchor. Right on the top of the hill, that's where the cows were, where they would milk them in the morning, and the milk churns would then be at the bottom of the hill. But later in the late 70s, early 80s, that's where, Echo and the Bunnymen, Teardrop Explodes. In my day, Showaddywaddy stayed. And then further on down the track was the old mill where they'd rehearse. I'm exhausted now.
It's much bigger site than perhaps I had in my mind.
So how did you come to live here?
I came to live there
at Rockfield.
Because of my mother being at the vicarage, her boyfriend's house, then these bands who came to her to rehearse, then going to Rockfield and basically saying, God, we've stayed with this woman to rehearse, and she is an amazing cook. And so Kingsley got to hear about her professional cordon bleu cooking, called her up and said, I hear you can cook, Joe. And then asked her to come to an interview. And because obviously my family and other rock stars is about all these, I interviewed a lot of people for it. And she said, yes, I had to go to the farmhouse, and I sat there. And then Kingsley and Charles turned to their mother, because it was with, Grandma Ward too, and said, Grandma said, she'll do boys. So it was an approval from the matriarch. So that's how she got there.
Tiffany, so in August 1975, Queen come to Rockfield. What stage of their career were they at this time?
They were coming in, Sheer Heart Attack was the year before, I believe, and they were coming in to not only work on other tracks for a night at the opera, but specifically because they were going from studio to studio during that time, and then up to London and then to Ridge Farm. But with Rockfield, what they did was they layered all the Galileos, all the vocals of the Galileos and the Figaros, all day, all night, again and again and again. So we as kids, there's a chapter about us. We're playing rounders in the quadrangle yard, and we're sort of rolling our eyes at all the Galileo. So it's about these kids being in this adult world, which, all kids, they just roll their eyes at an adult world, no matter how amazing it can be, So yes, that's specifically what they did, what Queen were doing at Rockfield. And they were there mid-August to early September. Yeah.
How did they feel about children running around on the site?
I think the basic thing that was that, bands didn't have a choice because we all lived there. The other kids were, for all intents and purposes, not allowed up to the quadrangle as much as I did because I lived there. So I think because it was the 70s, it was very much... I may have not been that good child of being seen and not heard, but bands didn't always engage with you. You know, they're not going to go, oh, hello, you're a lovely. But they were the musicians who did just stuck in my mind. And I remember
but some didn't interact at all.
Yeah, I remember Nick Lowe was just wonderful, and this gorgeous Irish band called Horselips invited me into the studio, and I'd sit there with them, and they were, you know, basically the book is really about a series of either suitable or really unsuitable father figures that I'm looking for. So Ozzy, no. Lemmy, not so much. Even though I did feed him, I tried to nurture him as my mum did. But Horselips, Freddie was more like a look at this lovely dog or look at this peacock, and we kind of went, oh, they're amazing.
So did Freddie Mercury, obviously Freddie Mercury's well known for being a cat lover. He had various cats throughout his life. Was he liked all the wildlife that are on site? He was into that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say pet-wise, I never saw him particularly enamoured of a sheep or, one of the cows. But at the vicarage, we had lots and lots of cats, and he would sort of lift them very carefully from the piano under the stairs. And I remember saying to my mum not long ago, well, when I was interviewing her for the book, I said, oh, I've just found out, Mum, that Freddie had a cat called Tiffany. Do you think there's... And she just gave me the most withering look and said, oh, darling, don't you think that's more to do with a shop on Fifth Avenue? So it was that. You can't imagine him taking any notice of this feral child that
But you did introduce him to, I think an Irish wolfhound that he was introduced to.
Yes, I stole an Irish wolfhound that had wandered into the farm, and
normal thing to steal.
Yeah, I was obsessed, and so I'd take her out very early in the morning. It was only for 2 days. How long can you steal an Irish wolfhound for? And he was just like, oh my God, she's magnificent. Is she your dog? And of course, being a child, I lied to him and said, yes, of course she is, because he loved my Great Dane called Cleo that I had at the vicarage, and there's a wonderful photograph in the book that Brian May allowed me to use, that Brian had taken a 3D picture that I found in Brian's book Queen in 3D, and it's Freddie hugging Cleo from behind with the rest of the band sitting at the table. So that was lovely.
Oh, brilliant. That's fantastic. And you also played a game of rounders with Queen.
Yes, we were playing rounders, with a tennis racket and inappropriate ball, probably. And the doors of Studio One, the Quadrangle Studio, were behind us. And what bands would do after being there for hours and hours and hours, they just sort of crash open the doors in this dramatic way, and just kind of flop out into the sunshine, just trying to breathe. And you'd get this sort of waft of studio air, which I'm sure some people know what that is. And they kind of took over our game. And I remember as kids, there's a chapter about it in the book, we were just really kind of, well, that's not fair. Why are these adults doing this? And we ran off and claimed our territory elsewhere.
Not many people can say that Freddie Mercury caught them out during a game of rounders.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
You might be the only person on the planet who can make that claim. I would be
I don't know. We'll
certain on.
We'll have to see. There might be.
Who knows? Maybe not.
A whole barrage of children out there.
So children aren't really supposed to go in the studios, presumably. But there is a story in the book where you can't quite resist sneaking in while I think Queen are having their dinner, and you do sneak into their studio.
Yes, no, I did, because I associated them with this dog Cleo. It's all about dogs, let's face it, this Great Dane Cleo. And I hadn't seen her since we left the vicarage. We had to leave very quickly, and all of the reasons why are in the book. So I had this obsession that maybe Cleo was with them. Maybe she'd been to Japan on tour, but ridiculous child belief. When you just believe that something's going to come back to you and you don't believe you're never going to see them again. So I did creep into the studio. I remember waiting until they'd gone in. My mother was doing Fanny Craddock's Crepe Suzette, which is all very performative, with the pan going on fire with the brandy, and it seemed to fit Queen. Yes, exactly. And so I went in, but of course I didn't find Cleo. But I remember the smell. I know there was lots of I call it in the book, I call it lemony Galileos, because it was about honey and lemon drinks and that sort of fuggy smell of hard work.
So this is while they're actually recording Bohemian Rhapsody, specifically?
Yeah. When they were doing all the Galileos and the Figaros and all of that, yeah.
So how did you react later when you saw the famous Bohemian Rhapsody video on TV, heard it on the radio, it becomes ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's number one for a long time, etc.?
Well, I was talking to Lisa Ward about this, and we both said we couldn't believe it when we saw their heads on top of the pops. I think for both of us, because we were both about the same age, that it was that moment, the first moment that we'd had even considered that these people coming to Rockfield were anything other than just, people coming to Rockfield, that they had another life out there. And seeing their faces, it was quite extraordinary. We couldn't quite put two and two together. And then I do remember my mother, when I interviewed her again, she said, I remember thinking, well, at least we aren't not I am sailing anymore, darling, So all of her reaction to it was almost like because of, all the layers of time and what it means to different people in different stages of their lives. I still don't associate it with the boys, because they, I'm mid-50s now, the boys who were at Rockfield and at the vicarage. It's this other thing.
Now, not long after Queen, another band come in, and this is Motorhead. Now, tell us, what did your mum make of Lemmy?
She said, well, she was paid extra money by the record company to get some food into Lemmy, because obviously he didn't eat that much. And my future stepfather Fritz was producing them, because Dave Edmunds had done it for a while and then just had enough. And so she sat him down and said, right, I have to feed you. And he said, don't be ridiculous, Joan. I only like Jack Daniels, all of that. And she said things like lasagna and beurre en croûte. And he was like, oh, you're taking the piss now. And so they decided on bacon sandwiches. But she said he was very specific. He wanted mother's pride, lots of salty butter, the crust cut off, none of that brown bread hippie shit, and the bacon well done and burnt. So, but she said, and there were lots of, again, it's all in chapters in the book, there were lots of things that she did for him, like taking his mum out and stepfather out for lunch because he couldn't cope with seeing them at the time. And but she said overall, he was just the politest guy. He was Lemmy, but he, you had to be polite, particularly to a woman. It was very, he had that backbone kind of. And she did say she wasn't so sure about Animal because he kept taking his clothes off and walking around.
They're recording very quickly because Animal has to go back to prison. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that's because it was shelved by the record company, but it was originally called On Parole. And Fritz, had to get him out of the prison, or it was all very, and I remember thinking I didn't know what parole meant or being sprung from prison, so I was asking all these questions, which at the time Fritz couldn't answer because he was in a Motorhead vortex of producing, which just meant, well, you can imagine what it meant. So yeah, Animal was, but Animal, there was a big thing that he had to do. He had to redo all of the drum bits that the former drummer, had left, and that's why he was brought in. So it was really laborious, and I remember Fritz talking about having to layer it all together in that kind of, speedy obsessive way.
While Motorhead are there, Lemmy's parents visit him at one stage.
You don't expect this, do you? This is not
quite
what you expect.
No, they aren't quite what you might expect them to be.
No, they were very... Mum said, that Lemmy's mother was very... twin set and pearls, and stepdad was, had a naval jacket, and they arrived. And I think that's why she said that he was in that zone, as I said before, but he just couldn't cope, so he locked himself away in the bungalow, which is one building I forgot to bring up. There's another building at Rockfield, the bungalow at the top of the track.
Let's go back to the start. Let's
go
redo
back
it.
to the start. Another building. And he just said, Joan, I can't cope. And he gave her 100 quid, she said, which in 1975... she probably could have gone out and bought a house. Exactly. And,
in Wales?
In Wales, yeah. She took them both out to dinner, lunch rather. But she did say when she got back, she insisted that he came out, and she made tea and cucumber sandwiches, and she said he did sit down for a while and, see his mum, which was nice.
What brought about the Hells Angels being invited to Rockfield?
That was all my stepfather Fritz, that one. Fritz never did things by halves, and he wanted...
So he's working as the producer for Motorhead.
Yeah, and he wanted, the sound of a proper Harley exhaust. But instead of just saying, calling up the local chapter of the Hells Angels, which is what he did from Grandma Ward's phone in the main house, he invited the entire chapter of the local Hells Angels, and they all came up the drive. And Mum said, she said, oh my God, everybody just ran. But she catered for them and did sandwiches and, orange squash. And they were all driving around with their, the big handlebars with the horns on and everything. And then Fritz, of course, being Fritz, never did things by halves. He auditions all the best bikes, puts the mic outside behind every bike. But in the end, he just used the first bike. And then they wouldn't leave because they wanted to see Lemmy, and he wouldn't come out. And so Mum did persuade him in the end. And she said he was very regal. He was just like, thank you so much for coming, shaking hands. But again, because this book, to a degree, is about the music business and failure, which is out there, and so the record company shelved On Parole, and then it came out in 1980 as, I think it was just called Motorhead, and that sound of the exhaust isn't on that. I can only find it on YouTube recordings. It's gone. Yeah, so you don't get the...
Is there a bootleg?
Yeah, I think there is a bootleg on YouTube.
Who did your mum get on better with, Ozzy Osbourne or Lemmy?
Lemmy. I mean, she didn't not get on with Ozzy Osbourne, but Ozzy was just in his own world. He wasn't really going to sit down for a chat. And also, Kingsley set up the clay pigeon trap, perversely, she said, for a summer, just outside her kitchen window, so they'd be shooting the clay traps every 2 minutes. So I think that, she was just like, oh, God, not again.
So we've discussed Queen and Black Sabbath and obviously Motorhead. We're going to go to the other end of the spectrum now, and who else comes into the studio but Showaddywaddy? Now, was this more to your music tastes than, as a young girl, than those bands that you're experiencing?
At the time, I mean, I was 8, or maybe 7 then. So Under the Moon of Love was out. I adored them on Top of the Pops. So I was so nervous to serve them their supper. And then I was, of course, reality hit me because they were just men in like jeans and sweatshirts, and they weren't wearing teddy boy suits or drainpipe trousers, and but
so they weren't wearing their stage clothes.
No, I know there was no bright colours, but I was still over the moon because I had such a crush not only on Romeo but Dave, the lead singer, as an 8-year-old, which is highly inappropriate. But there we are. But I braved asking them for an autograph, and it was just so deeply embarrassing that I never did that again at Rockfield. Never, never.
Someone else who comes in is Rush, which is another genre again completely. Do you remember anything about Rush?
I remember them recording in the quadrangle. They were very much outside because it was summer, and it was the Queen's Jubilee. And I also remember, and the photographs are actually in Geddy Lee's great autobiography that was released, I think, last year, were they in these teeny tiny 70s satin shorts. Do you remember those? They had sort of white piping, and they were either red or blue, and so they were wearing those with teeny tiny singlets over mini moogs, you know, in the quadrangle courtyard with all the horses going. So I have this clear image, and I have a clear image of them having all these instruments and being quite astounded by, you know, from tiny little percussion instruments to, you know, I didn't know what a mini moog was, or I didn't, you know, I had no idea. But suddenly that's, I think, when I first started to see, not electronic music, but you know what I mean? Music that is not just a guitar and a bass and a drum. So I really remember that. And Mum said, because they were on a different time scale, they would really work all the evening and all through the night. So she would change the menu a little and like leave out hot chocolate and you know, soups or things that they could help themselves to, like lasagna or moussaka, and it wasn't a big deal. Right. And Geddy Lee does talk about, it's lovely, he talks about the food just a little bit in his autobiography, just basically saying, yeah, amazing experience first time round, because I don't think with Hemispheres, I don't think their work ethic was as sharp as it was for Kings. But he said the thing was that just to have all this provided, so they didn't have to go anywhere. They didn't have to go to the local diner.
Very handy.
One of your mum's favourite rock stars, and again, a regular feature on the playlist in the book, is another visitor to the studio, and that is David Bowie, who is along with Iggy Pop to record Iggy's Soldier album. How did you and the other kids, and maybe your mum, react to David Bowie being in your midst?
Well, the kids that I was, you know, closest to were much older than me, two girls, Karina and Bridget, and they definitely but nurtured my David Bowie love. My mother introduced me to David Bowie, and I'm talking about when I was a little kid and hunky-dory, not personally. So we were just astounded when he arrived. And they were very much not allowed to go up to the studio to see him. But of course, I had a lucky in because I could help Mum in the kitchen. And it was because it was 79 now, far beyond the Showaddywaddy experience. David Bowie, far beyond the Showaddywaddy experience. But I just remember, you know, going up to him and asking him what would he like, and he would always say, just a little bit, please. And he was still drinking milk then, you know.
He never looked like a big eater, David Bowie.
No. But it was the milk that kept him alive all those years, and, you know, Coco saying, drink milk, and he did. So that, it was amazing just to be in his presence. And I did interview Mum about it, and it was just near the time she was thinking about moving on. And she said, oh gosh, yes, he was so beautiful. But really, Tiffany, I had my own life to lead. And I was like, oh, Mum, for God's sake, why didn't you do this or do that or ask him that? But, you know, it was a job. So she was just doing her job.
A guest of ours last year, Tiffany, was Derek Forbes, who's the bass player in Simple Minds. And in his memoir, and I remember him telling us this story, of course, Simple Minds, massive Bowie fans, find themselves at Rockfield at the same time as Iggy Pop and David Bowie. What a fantastic thing. And you again talk about their collaboration. Tell us a little bit more about what happened between those two giants colliding.
Well, the first one was a food fight. That was the first collaboration.
One of many. One of many
food fights. Apparently, I didn't see it, but Mum said they had a food fight in the quadrangle, which was usual for the bands in Studio 2 and Studio 1, because, of course, Simple Minds were in Studio 2. And we as kids adored Simple Minds, still do, because we adored Empires and Dance, one of the best, early electronica albums. It was just, we'd be in the lodge dancing to I Travel, while they were across the track. But what happened was basically they were asked to come up to do the backing vocals on Play It Safe, I think. And I did read an interview where they said they had to do this sort of faux Cockney accent rather than their Scottish, This is, it's not Play It Safe, it's Play It Safe. And I just love that. Jim Kerr did write, he wrote about it and he said, Rockfield, ? The best years of our lives. And I just think that's so gorgeous, Yeah.
It is.
Those food fights lived long in the memory, clearly. Yeah. What about Iggy Pop? He's a bit of a curveball for him.
He was a bit of a curveball for my mum.
One of many curveballs that are coming in. But
I think by then they were all straight balls because she was just so used to it. She was like, yeah, whatever. But I would describe him in the book as being a little bit like, Tigger. Because he was just bouncy, just run about the place. And, again, Mum was on the edge of leaving, although she didn't then leave for the next couple of years. So I remember her saying, well, bloody hell, he stole my cheddar. So there's a bit of, food stealing going on. But I love that album. I love Soldier. I don't know what it did at the time.
Yeah.
Whether it, I just think it's such a brilliant album, never mind the kind of time it encapsulates for me.
Is there anyone else from the 70s that we haven't mentioned that you'd like to mention? Any other bands that came in that you remember? Because there's quite a long list.
There is a long list. I mean, I'd love to mention Nick Lowe, who I did follow around like a puppy, because he was just, say in the book, he was just so tall and he looked like a bird of prey and he was so kind. He didn't mind me wandering around. And he's been very kind recently. I invited him to my launch and he came. It was amazing. I felt
fantastic,
overawed. And also Graham Parker, because there's something so special about the Heat Treatment album. I love it, and I love the fact that it was recorded in the summer, of 76, with all that heat.
So you move out of Rockfield. You've mentioned this a couple of times. But your mum opens a restaurant nearby, but you still visit Rockfield. Is that correct?
Yes, because the restaurant is in Monmouth, so I go to the same school as all the rock. Well,
and it's a big success, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a really
the restaurant is a hit.
Yeah, and some bands would come there, so you'd get Captain Sensible in the cellar, where Fritz, my stepfather, had his bar. So it was during the 80 to about 81. Yeah.
There are so many touch points in this book for me, Tiffany. So, for example, I'm going to share with you Showaddywaddy. Now, I'm a little bit older than you. But Showaddywaddy, I bought 3 Steps to Heaven, right? And
very good.
I've always felt embarrassed by this, and I'll tell you why. Because I've got a younger brother, John, who's 2 years younger than me, and we both went out. I don't know why, but we must have had some money, birthday money or something, and we both went to buy a record, and I bought Showaddywaddy's 3 Steps to Heaven. Now, a great record. I think it got to number 1, but my brother John bought 10cc's I'm Not in Love. Now, I think of the 2 records, his choice maybe has stood the ravages of time a little better. The other touch point for me, which we're going to go on about to talk about now, the very first band I saw live was the Teardrop Explodes. Now, I can't believe when I opened this book, you spent time with two of my favourite all-time bands, Echo and the Bunnymen and Teardrop Explodes. So we're coming towards the end of your period at Rockfield. Tell us a little bit about your experiences with the beautiful Julian Cope and the rest of them.
Well, yes. Again, us kids, we were very much, even if these people were in the room with us, we were, the other side of the looking glass, looking at their beauty. But I remember specifically, it's all very metaphor based, but it did really happen. I was having my ears pierced by Karina, one of the Rockfield kids, at the lodge table. And Julian Cope comes in because he's got the big block tape VHS from Top of the Pops, and they just recorded a reward, and a bike had come down with it, and they hadn't seen it yet, and they didn't have a VHS up at the Little Anchor, and he said, "Oh, can I play it?" And he was sitting on this sort of brightly coloured carpet with me having my ears pierced, watching himself or the band having the video of Reward, and there was just something about that moment as the bolts of metal go into my ears that I'll always remember. But yeah, it was great reading their memoirs, actually, both Will Sargent and Julian Cope's Head On.
Well, I was telling Simon about Head On. I mean, one of the great music biographies, and I was sharing with him his description of his very first acid trip, which happens at Rockfield. And it's one of the funniest. I mean, reading about people taking drugs, frankly, can be very dull. Yeah. But Julian Cope's description of watching Milk in a Bottle and talking to the cows lives with me for a long time. So, yeah, and you were in the midst of all that craziness.
Yeah, we would, and that's a great moment of that chapter in Head On. But Bridget said, "Oh, do you remember, Tiff, when we went outside into the garden and there was somebody like dancing on the hill in a sheet?" And I was like, "Oh my God, yes!" And he was dancing around singing "The Hills Are Alive" with the Sound of Music. But it was really interesting to read in Head On that he came first to Rockfield, having not, done the amazing Julian Cope journey with psychedelic drugs. And then the second visit, that was his portal, if you like. So yeah, it's definitely in terms of that book a coming of age for him.
After overhearing the making of Bohemian Rhapsody a few years before, someone else you overhear is Adam and the Ants. Were you old enough at this point? So by this stage in the early 80s, you're actually a fan of these bands and you're fully aware who they are, whereas perhaps earlier you were perhaps a little too young to know who some of these people are.
My lasting memory is coming home from school and walking past the 5-bar gate, and even though they're not wearing all the regalia and all of the gear that they later wore onto that one when they did Dog Eat Dog and the amp music on Top of the Pops, they were sitting on the 5-bar gate, and I think it was the first time that my knees had ever given way slightly, and they were there for all of August, for a whole month, so we had to sort of cope with them, and I mean that in a very young teenagers coping with beautiful flames, i.e. Adam himself, and Karina and Bridget, because they did have Dirt Wears White Socks, and we would listen to that, but then all of that success for them came very quickly after that.
The likes of Adam and Queen, and they come in, and then within a few months they're the biggest thing on Top of the Pops, and they're the biggest bands in the country after that. But you mentioned that it's almost entirely men who are coming in terms of the people who are coming into Rockfield. Was there any women that did come in during this period?
The women, Mum always said to me, "Well, you just missed Joan Armour Trading, darling," because I didn't move to Rockfield when she did. It took me a few months. So I missed Joan Armour Trading, the most amazing woman. And basically, I can't, apart from the lead singer of Clannad, I can't remember any women being there in the 70s. But then the first woman I remember, even though she didn't record there, she was there because Altered Images and Claire Grogan, another woman there, was there, and Steve Severin was producing, was Siouxsie Sioux. So going from a desert of no women to suddenly Siouxsie Sioux being there was quite incredible. I mean, I'm not saying it made up for the lack of women, but it was a good benchmark to go for.
I have to say, Tiffany, I did question Susie's dress choice, because I think you say she arrives on the back of a motorcycle wearing white. Now, again, I'm thinking muddy track, so I didn't quite work that out. But then Susie transcends everything, so we'll give her that.
And I'm sure when she left London, she didn't think, "Oh, there'll be a bloody muddy track. I like my lovely white clothes." But yeah, and of course
Sheila Chandra as well.
Yes.
Soon.
Oh,
I'm tempted to sing Ever So Lonely. I think she gets a mention
song.
Too.
And I remember so clearly up at Little Anchor, and because she was so young then, that she was practicing her dance for Top of the Pops. And I remember spying on her, and she was so kind to me. So she said, "Don't worry, come in and watch."
Now, Tiffany, about 400 metres from where I'm sitting, on Hoe Street in Walthamstow, it's currently a Polish delicatessen. But back in the 80s, it was one of the leading punk record shops in London called Small Wonder. And Small Wonder were notable. They released about 20 records, but one of the more notable releases was by the Northamptonshire band Bauhaus. So it feels fitting to me, as a Walthamstow-based podcast, that we end by talking about Bauhaus at Rockfield. Tell us about Bauhaus and what they were doing.
Well, I'm not sure, because they were there for 2 albums. I'm not sure which the first one was, but I do remember.
Yeah, In the Flat Field was the first album. Wasn't recorded at Rockfield. No, the others did.
Yeah, and I remember distinctly being so jealous of Karina, because she was the one that got to hoover Pete Murphy's bedroom, because, back then. And I'm the only one that finds this funny, but because you've got to amuse yourself as a writer, that I call the last recipe in the book Bela Lugosi's Fed. And I really wanted my mum.
That's orange chicken, I think.
It is well remembered, because Mum was. Yeah, she was embracing nouvelle cuisine.
I feel like the people who get that joke are going to be your friend for life, and the people who don't.
At last, do you mean I found my people at last?
You should tell that joke everywhere you go, and the people who get it, they're the ones to talk to.
Yeah.
Right, so every episode, Mark has to field 3 true or false questions. Mark, let's see how you do. First one, Tiffany once fell asleep at a Dire Straits gig.
I honestly don't know. I'm going to say no.
Tiffany, what happened?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, but I was a child, and it was to do with the loud music.
Right, yeah.
It was a lullaby, and it's a trigger for me. I also fell asleep at when Jimmy Page and Robert Plant did their tour. It's just a childhood trigger.
Page and Plant tour.
Yeah, sleep.
Of course, we have mentioned numerous times on this podcast, Mark's daughter Millie did fall asleep during a Taylor Swift gig, so you're not the only one to have done this.
But like you, Tiff, she would have been 8 or 9, so she was still quite young, and it's way past her bedtime. So I'll give her a break.
Yes, we will. Second question: Coldplay's "Yellow" was written in the quadrangle at Rockfield.
Why don't It's been a while since I've read this book. Why don't I know that?
It's not in the book.
Oh, right, okay.
Because it's a different time period. It's just happened at Rockfield or not.
I might be getting some things mixed up. Again, I'm saying no to that.
True. I think this happened. Do you know about this, Tiffany?
Yes. Lisa, because I wasn't there, it wasn't my time. Lisa Ward told me about it recently, and it was that moment they couldn't find what they were looking for, and it was just not working out. And walked into the courtyard at night, and Kingsley was with them, and somebody said, "Look at the stars," and then it became.
Rockfield can claim Wonderwall, Bohemian Rhapsody, and Yellow, three massive songs.
But Simon, we're going to. Walthamstow is making a claim for Coldplay because their first single was released on Simon's Fierce Panda and mastered. So it may not have been recorded at Rockfield, I don't know, but it was mastered again just a few doors up from the Small Wonder shop in a mastering studio called Hilton Grove.
When we get Coldplay on Music Maps, we'll talk about that. So. We mentioned Wonderwall there, which takes me on to the final question. During the recording of Definitely Maybe at the nearby Mono Valley studio, obviously the Stone Roses were at Rockfield at the same time, making Second Coming. Which two members of Oasis commandeered a combine harvester to visit the Stone Roses? So it's Liam Noel, Bonehead, Griggsy, or Tony McCarroll at that point.
I'm going to go for Bonehead and Liam.
Yes.
There we go. It's obvious, isn't it?
The two wildest members of Oasis, so I guess it's reasonably obvious. But yeah, there we go. It's mentioned in the documentary, the Rockfield documentary that came out a couple of years ago. Just one thing I wanted to mention, Tiffany, is your mum an inspiration for Killer Queen? Or does that predate her time?
No, it doesn't predate her at all, because it's sheer heart attack.
The sheer heart attacks when they're at the vicarage, isn't it?
And she had a pretty cabinet. She drank Moët and Chandon. She had a club. Well, she's still here. She's still with us. She has a very upper middle cut glass accent. Spoke like a baroness. There are obviously the other theories of the song, which hopefully don't apply to her. I don't know. It's her business. So I like to think yes. Let's embrace that myth and say yes, or claim it.
At the end of each episode, we each recommend something you've liked for a long time, something you've recently discovered. Mark?
I'm very, very late to this, and friends have told me it was wonderful, but I've just started watching on TV Ted Lasso, and it's wonderful. It's very uplifting. What a joy. So and I'm sorry, everyone else has watched this and moved on, but Ted Lasso is my recommendation.
Tiffany?
I would like to... The book is... there's a lot of Graham Parsons. There's a lot of Dolly Parton in the book. There's a lot of the band. And there is this lovely duo, local band, even though they're global as well, called Outpost Drive. And I'd like to recommend them. Husband and wife team, very young. She's from Alabama. He's from Herefordshire, so we like a Herefordshire boy. And they were recently on Whispering Bob's country show, and they're lovely. Outpost Drive. I saw them in a cave in the Forest of Dean, and I really mean that, a gig in a cave.
Wow.
Yeah, they were beautiful.
There we go. I'm going to recommend Harry Brook, plays cricket for England. So he scored last week 170 in one innings. In the previous test series in Pakistan, he scored 317 from 322 balls. So yeah, Harry Brook, very entertaining. So that's mine.
Well, I've never heard of Harry, so thank you for that.
You're going to hear a lot about him in the coming years.
Now, Tiffany, there are very few books that I will recommend to my wife. My wife has a very good reading group. They've been meeting for years, but this is such a wonderfully written book. I say we're the books we talk about and we host are all great books. We only do things that we really enjoy, but yours certainly is written at a slightly different level than many other rock memoirs. But it's such a wonderful story, and it's a story, as you say, it's about very strong female characters. It's a story about a yearning, looking for father figures. I mean, it's just so deep and broad compared to, I say, your standard rock memoir. And it's one of the books we've been recommending to my wife, or have recommended to my wife, that she and her book group might want to read. All that remains is for us to thank Tiffany. My Life and other rock stars is published by Little Brown. It has been a joy to see these past few months that it's appeared in. It's been reviewed everywhere. Everyone's loved it. It's now appearing in almost all of the year-end best-ofs. So that must be hopefully vindication and wonderful to see, Tiffany. All that remains really is for us to thank you for taking time out to come on to Music Maps, introducing us to Joan, to Fritz, to Cleo the Great Dane, and the other magnificent characters who you spent time with as a child. So, Tiffany, thank you for your time. Thanks very much.
I can't thank you enough. Honestly, both of you, your reading of the book is just joyful. Thank you. I've learned things about the book from you. Thank you.